What if I told you that fungi help make soil before forests ever existed, or that tiny tardigrades managed to survive every major extinction in surprising ways, and we'll explain how? Recent research even suggests the last universal common ancestor may have been alive 4.2 billion years ago, and parts of the Cambrian Explosion started earlier than we thought. This is the 2025 Science Edition, based on the latest findings. In just over an hour, we'll shrink 4.5 billion years of Earth's history into seconds, with every flash marking millions of years of transformation. You'll see volcanic worlds, vanished oceans, and creatures stranger than fiction, all part of the epic chain that eventually produced us. But before any of that could exist, Earth itself had to come into being, and its arrival was anything but peaceful. A violent birth and a stolen moon. Imagine the world first coming together in a storm of collisions, where dust, rock, and entire planets in waiting smashed into one another. Among these encounters, one stands out. A body roughly the size of Mars, now named Theia, struck the young Earth in a collision so massive that it likely vaporized huge amounts of rock and atmosphere and hurled debris into orbit. Out of that orbiting rubble, the moon began to form. The scar overhead that regulates tides and calms Earth's tilt was born from that single catastrophic event. A fragment of Earth remade into a permanent companion. For hundreds of millions of years afterward, the planet remained unstable. Its surface was a restless ocean of lava, with crust hardening only to collapse again as heat escaped from within. We are now in the Hadean Eon, stretching from about 4.5 to 4 billion years ago, a span that lived up to its name. This was a world of fire, bombardment, and short-lived atmospheres stripped again and again by fresh impacts. To anyone looking on, it would have been an endless cycle of surfaces forming, shattering, and vanishing beneath liquid rock. The young solar system was far more hostile than today. The early inner planets endured frequent large collisions, with asteroids tens to hundreds of kilometers across plummeting down in waves. Each strike remodeled Earth's crust, sometimes liquefying vast regions, sometimes boiling away what water had managed to collect on the surface. Debris stirred into orbit returned in firestorms, flaring across the sky. Still, even within this turmoil, small steps toward stability began to emerge. The moon, just freshly formed, loomed enormous in the sky and hovered much closer to Earth than now. Its gravitational pull dragged tides across molten seas and amplified volcanism inside the planet. With Earth spinning far faster, its days lasting only a few hours, the combined effect of rapid rotation and heavy tidal forces drove relentless internal motion. Though it was far from a habitable planet, these forces were already helping the surface shed heat more quickly, setting the stage for cooler crust to persist. At around 4.3 billion years ago, a curious record appeared, tiny crystals of zircon durable enough to survive until today. These zircons reveal chemical signatures showing that liquid water had pooled on the surface, even under such hostile conditions. They are direct, tangible markers, the oldest known evidence that rain fell, steamed away, and pooled again on magma fields until small but lasting bodies of water formed. Early oceans may have existed long before anyone imagined, even if they were not like the stable seas we know now. That water was never secure. Plant-sized impacts continued to strip oceans away, vaporizing surface reservoirs into the atmosphere in destructive waves. Some of that water escaped outright into space, but much condensed and rained back over spans of thousands of years. The Earth entered a rhythm of loss and renewal, gaining minerals each time as impacts crushed surface rocks and exposed fresh materials to chemical weathering. In this endless repetition, the surface of Earth was quietly becoming more enriched, its chemistry nudged toward complexity. Recent models suggest the Theia impact did more than just launch the moon. It fundamentally scrambled Earth's internal structure, turning heavy and light elements together and possibly speeding the formation of the core. That acceleration may have generated the magnetic field that has shielded Earth ever since, deflecting solar radiation and preserving the nascent atmosphere. Without such a field, the planet might have suffered Mars's fate, stripped bare, its water chased away by the sun's wind. Seen that way, a catastrophic collision was also a critical safeguard, securing conditions needed for any future life. Still, time stretched on. Hundreds of millions of years ticked by as the Earth tried to keep a stable surface. Small fragments of solid crust began to persist, emerging like temporary rafts in the flames. They weren't continents, not yet, but slabs of cooling rock, some collecting rain instead of losing it instantly to steam. Together with minerals leached from inside the planet and gases from the atmosphere above, they created enclosed places where chemistry could grow more intricate, places increasingly different from the world outside. Impacts from space kept delivering new ingredients. Some asteroids contained water locked deep inside, released only when they smashed into the crust. Others carried carbon-rich compounds, simple but essential. Every collision added to the chemical stockpile, tossing ingredients into Earth's evolving surface waters. By the end of the Hadean, what seemed like devastation had produced an improbable combination: liquid water, protective shielding, and a stabilizing moon. All had emerged not in spite of violence, but because of it. So the impact that once split Earth and created its satellite also forged the conditions for oceans to appear around 4.3 billion years ago. These oceans reflected a dimmer sun, with the moon still looming vastly larger overhead. They were not yet alive. They were dark, mineral-rich expanses lying over a hostile, restless planet. But that alone was enough to redirect Earth's future, allowing chemistry a chance to explore possibilities never seen before. And in those waters, the next transformation was already quietly preparing to begin. The dawn of life, microbes take the stage. What followed was not the rise of continents or forests, but the quiet emergence of life itself, microscopic, ancient, and almost unrecognizable by modern standards. This was the true dawn of biology, when the earliest microbial communities began shaping a world that still looked utterly alien. One prevailing idea asks us to picture life beginning not in sunlight but in the deep ocean around hydrothermal vents. Here, black chimneys of volcanic rock spewed mineral-rich water heated far above the boiling point, kept liquid only by the crushing pressure of kilometers of seawater. In these environments, temperature gradients and chemical disequilibria offered energy for reactions. Laboratory studies and computer modeling have shown that in such systems, organic molecules can form, concentrate, and grow more complex. If early life had a birthplace, vents remain one of the most plausible candidates. Recent research pushes the timing of such beginnings further back than long assumed. Genetic studies in 2024 and 2025 suggest that the last universal common ancestor, LUCA, may date to nearly 4.2 billion years ago, while isotopic traces in some ancient rocks also hint at early metabolism between 4 and 4.2 billion. These signals are still debated and difficult to interpret, but the trend is clear. Life may have appeared surprisingly soon after Earth had liquid water. If correct, life did not wait for stable continents or an oxygen-rich sky. It appears to have started well before either existed, with early metabolisms exploiting chemistry rather than sunlight. These first oceans were nothing like the blue seas of today. They were acidic and heavily mineralized, crowded with iron dissolved from volcanic rocks, giving them a murky green hue under the dim glow of the young sun. Carbon dioxide thickened the skies, while methane and hydrogen sulfide drifted through dark hazes. For modern organisms, such a setting would be toxic, but microbes at the origins of life required no oxygen, no breathable air. In fact, high oxygen at that time might have been destructive, disrupting fragile prebiotic chemistry before it stabilized. The absence of oxygen, paradoxically, was an advantage. The boundary between non-living chemistry and life is difficult to define in this period. What likely existed first were networks of molecules that could copy themselves imperfectly, leaving behind variations. Compartments may have formed in pore spaces of rocks or within the micropockets of mineral formations, allowing concentration, shelter, and repeated reactions. Over countless iterations, some systems began stabilizing and became what we would now recognize as microbial ancestors, entities able to persist, reproduce, and use environmental energy to drive their cycles. Direct fossils from this time do not exist. Instead, scientists rely on isotopic fingerprints preserved in the oldest rocks. Subtle shifts in carbon ratios hint at early carbon fixation, while sulfur isotope anomalies point toward primitive metabolisms. Some rocks in Greenland and Australia record evidence older than 3.8 billion years and possibly older still. These traces are faint and often contested, but together they suggest that once Earth had persistent water, lifelike processes followed quickly. Conditions at the surface were still punishing. Without an ozone layer, ultraviolet radiation battered exposed areas. Meteorite impacts could sterilize large regions or even briefly vaporize shallow oceans. Yet life persisted by retreating into protective environments beneath the surface in fissures deep in vent systems or within porous minerals. These hidden niches provided stability even as the larger environment swung between extremes. At this microscopic scale, chemistry had continuity, giving life a chance to endure every disruption. Among the most remarkable innovations of these early times was the gradual acquisition of photosynthesis. Primitive forms may not have split water or released oxygen, but instead drew power from infrared light or used simpler molecules as donors in chemical reactions. Over many millions of years, however, certain microbes developed pigments to capture more of the sun's light. A lineage of them, Cyanobacteria, eventually cracked the challenge of using water as an electron donor, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. The rise of Cyanobacteria was not immediate or exclusive. For vast spans, they coexisted alongside groups of archaea and bacteria that thrived without oxygen, living from hydrogen, methane, or sulfur chemistry. To the casual eye, the surface world would have seemed barren, dotted only by volcanic outcrops and small islands. Yet beneath thin coastal seas, cyanobacteria spread in dense layered mats, capturing sunlight and building thick, domed structures with mineral grains. These are stromatolites, visible collaborations of countless microbes, preserved in rock layers still visible today, and among the oldest lasting evidence that life once covered Earth. Microbes during this early period became astonishingly resilient. Different lineages evolved enzymes to protect against acid, heat, or salt. Some created resting stages, shutting down into durable forms that could wait out hostile conditions. Others enclosed themselves within protective casings that resisted radiation. Collectively, these strategies allowed survival through impacts, volcanism, and fluctuations in the planet's chemistry. Even now, extremophiles on modern Earth, living in boiling springs, acid lakes, or frozen deserts, carry echoes of these ancient adaptations. By roughly 3.5 billion years ago, Earth had transitioned from sterile rock and toxic oceans into a microbial planet. The hidden work of these communities altered their surroundings molecule by molecule. Cyanobacteria in particular had begun releasing oxygen into the seas, though for hundreds of millions of years that oxygen immediately bonded with iron and sulfur, vanishing before reaching the skies. Only once these sinks were saturated would oxygen finally build in the atmosphere, but that moment was still far ahead. Still, the groundwork was already laid. Invisible processes were reshaping the chemistry of oceans and air, slow but steady. The world remained hostile to anything larger than microbes, yet those microbes exerted planetary influence, setting in motion the processes that would soon change climate, geology, and the global balance of gases. In their persistence, generation after generation, the first great transformation of Earth had begun, quiet, microscopic, but unavoidable. The pace of change would accelerate. Altered gases would amplify reactions in the atmosphere, changing how heat was trapped and released. What started in the dim seas around vent systems was expanding to scales that encompassed air, sky, and climate. The story of microbes, once confined to sheltered niches, was about to spill outward and reshape Earth as a whole. The oxygen revolution and Earth's first freeze. Earth once existed beneath a blanket of methane and carbon-rich haze that trapped heat, keeping the seas liquid under a sun that shone far weaker than today. For hundreds of millions of years, this balance sustained microbial mats in coastlines and shallow oceans. Then a process began that changed everything. Colonies of cyanobacteria, quietly photosynthesizing in stromatolites, released waste into their surroundings, not carbon dioxide this time, but oxygen. At first, this oxygen left no trace in the sky. It reacted with metals dissolved in water, especially abundant iron. Oceans turned rusty red as oxygen bonded into minerals that fell to the seafloor. These alternating deposits of oxidized and reduced material, still visible today as banded iron formations, document a hidden story. Oxygen was being produced, but every molecule was locked away before it could transform the air above. Eventually, after millions of years, those chemical sinks filled. Iron precipitation slowed, sulfur compounds met their limits, and free oxygen began to persist. Between 2.4 and 2.3 billion years ago, atmospheric levels crossed a tipping point. The event is now called the Great Oxidation Event. Its pace was not sudden, unfolding over tens of millions of years, but the implications were profound. Methane, Earth's most efficient greenhouse gas at the time, was destroyed by oxygen, replaced by carbon dioxide, a weaker blanket against the cold. With less heat trapped, planetary temperatures began to drop. For microbes adapted to chemical environments without oxygen, this new gas was not a gift, it was toxic. Oxygen damaged existing metabolisms and favored lineages that could tolerate it. Cellular molecules oxidized, DNA broke apart, membranes destabilized. Microbial populations dwindled or sought protection in anoxic sediments beneath rocks in the deep sea, anywhere oxygen had little reach. Meanwhile, slowly evolving enzymes to neutralize reactive oxygen allowed some organisms not just to survive, but eventually to thrive. Biology had met its first self-inflicted extinction crisis, one that restructured ecosystems at the smallest scale. The loss of methane warmed balance only amplified hardships. With weaker greenhouse protection under a still dim sun, ice began its advance. Glaciers crept from poles and high ground across continents, expanding outward year after year. Temperatures plunged until the oceans themselves froze over. Geological records suggest the planet descended into a near-global glaciation, one of Earth's first Snowball Earth episodes. Seen from orbit, the surface would have been stark and white, clouds swirling over thick ice stretching toward the equator. Life was forced to retreat into refuges. Hydrothermal vents at mid-ocean ridges provided heat and chemicals, sustaining chemosynthetic microbes visible nowhere on the frozen surface. Briny layers of water, kept liquid by salt beneath the ice, likely harbored communities as well. Volcanic outcrops may have punctured through expanding glaciers, forming thin, warm zones. Cracks within ice sheets allowed faint light to trickle enough for limited photosynthesis. Spores capable of resting in extreme cold waited out the harsher intervals. Models in geology suggest these glaciations lasted millions of years, during which life clung to such protective environments in reduced but persistent form. The precise span remains debated, though isotopic evidence in ancient rocks shows disruptions in carbon cycles consistent with a global freeze. Dust from dry land blew across glaciers, while subglacial volcanism trapped gases that later leaked back into the atmosphere. During these long millennia, biological evolution did not stop, but it slowed under extreme stress, favoring the few strategies that offered resilience. Relief came through the steady work of volcanoes. Even under ice, eruptions continued and carbon dioxide accumulated in the atmosphere because nothing, no plants, no vast oceans was drawing it back down. Over millions of years, that reservoir thickened. Eventually, greenhouse warming overwhelmed the reflectivity of the frozen sphere. When the tipping point was finally reached, glaciers retreated rapidly, oceans thawed. Meltwater cascaded into basins and fresh nutrients from weathered dust fertilized seas. Whole ecosystems revived, and surviving lineages spread into freed habitats. The aftermath of the thaw was as consequential as the freeze itself. Populations refined by survival pressures had adapted to oxygen tolerance, and for the first time, oxygen metabolism became advantageous rather than lethal. Cells capable of harnessing oxygen could capture vastly more energy, powering larger size and greater complexity. A toxic byproduct had been redefined into a biological tool. From this turning point onward, the atmosphere never returned to a fully anoxic state. Oxygen levels fluctuated but trended upward, laying down the foundation upon which more elaborate metabolisms would later build. The Great Oxidation event was not simply a chemical reshuffling, it was a restructuring of possibility. It enabled the energetic capacities that multicellular organisms would one day require. This first Snowball Earth must also be seen against the background of geological record. Rocks scratched by once advancing glaciers, deposits of unusual carbon isotopes, all are fingerprints of global-scale change driven in large part by biology itself. Tiny microbes, through oxygen release, initiated a chain reaction that altered climate, carved marks into bedrock, and forced the planet into cycles of collapse and recovery. The power of life to redirect planetary systems was being written in evidence that persists billions of years later. The Earth would not experience its most dramatic global freezes again until the Cryogenian period, between 720 and 635 million years ago. During those later episodes, ice again extended nearly worldwide, testing survival strategies a second time. Each cycle brought extinctions but also mutations, shaping gene pools that could navigate extremes. Importantly, the survivors and the geochemical aftermath of these freezes set the stage for the eventual rise of animals in the Cambrian period. These events also underscored a new theme. Life in Earth's environment could no longer be separated. Biology influenced atmosphere and climate, which in turn shaped the course of evolution. After oxygen accumulation and the freezing episodes it triggered, the future of the planet had entered a feedback loop between living systems and planetary systems, one that defined the rest of Earth's story. Out of the ice ages, oxygenated seas, and forged survivors, the ground was now ready for even stranger changes. Soon, the processes inside rocks and deep beneath the landscape would set off developments as surprising as any microbial innovation. Supercontinents and strange nuclear reactors. Did you know that Earth once ran its own nuclear reactor? Long before humans ever built machines to split atoms, natural conditions allowed such a process to occur on their own. About 2 billion years ago, in what is now Oklo, uranium-rich deposits sat locked in sandstone layers. With the right proportions of uranium isotopes in the steady seep of groundwater, the rock formations themselves produced cycles of self-sustaining nuclear fission, essentially functioning as natural reactors. As water flowed in, it slowed neutrons enough to keep the chain reaction stable. When the water boiled away, reactions paused until new groundwater filtered back. This stop-and-start cycle repeated over hundreds of thousands of years, releasing heat not as explosions but as a steady rhythm of energy. Evidence of these reactions survives in the isotopes of the surrounding rocks. Unusual ratios of certain elements compared to anywhere else on Earth confirm that nuclear processes occurred naturally inside those deposits. At least a dozen discrete reactor zones once operated this way beneath Oklo. The system was in perfect balance: uranium fuel, natural moderation by groundwater, and cycles of heating and cooling that continued until the supply was exhausted. Some scientists suggest that the local heat and chemical reactions may have created favorable conditions for microbes underground, though evidence is limited and remains speculative. What is clear is that physics itself, unaided by any machinery, sustained a nuclear process for immense stretches of time. While natural reactors quietly pulsed below ground, the surface of the Earth was undergoing transformations of an entirely different scale. The planet's crust was shifting, colliding, and welding pieces of land together into one of the earliest supercontinents. Between about 1.8 and 1.6 billion years ago, massive continental blocks assembled into a single vast landmass known as Columbia or Nuna. Unlike the recognizable shapes of modern continents, these cratons were irregular fragments, crust that had survived the violent early Earth, pushed and stitched together by tectonic motion. The creation of Columbia set off far-reaching consequences. Mountain ranges rose where fragments collided, altering weather patterns and sending torrents of fresh minerals down into the seas. New basins changed how water circulated, redirecting currents and reshaping shallow continental shelves. In these coastal margins, where light, nutrients, and chemistry mixed, microbial life colonized extensively. The merging of continents did not simply reshape geography, it also shifted the balance of resources that life depended upon. Tectonic collisions recycled and buried sediments, driving volcanism along fault zones. Each eruption belched gases and enriched the oceans with more trace elements. Fresh weathering of uplifted rock surfaces pulled carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, a process that cooled the climate but stabilized it over long timescales. Silicate weathering carried carbon out to sea floors, locking it in carbonates, while volcanic activity returned portions of it to the air. This cycle acted as a thermostat, balancing conditions while maintaining temperate oceans suitable for more resilient ecosystems. These more stable environments supported key evolutionary thresholds. Around this time, a new class of organism appeared: eukaryotes. Unlike bacteria or archaea, these cells contained compartments, nuclei to protect genetic material, and organelles to manage energy. Their structure allowed far larger cell size, the storage of longer strands of DNA, and more varied metabolisms. Fossil evidence reveals relatively large microfossils in rocks laid down near this era, some visible to the naked eye. They marked the rise of complexity beyond what had defined life for billions of years. The timing of eukaryote evolution may not be accidental. As Columbia rose, erosion released trace elements, iron, zinc, copper, and others essential to enzymes and cellular machinery, into seas in greater concentrations. These nutrients acted as enabling tools for more intricate biochemistry. Oxygen, creeping upward in concentration though still far below modern levels, offered entirely new energy pathways. Within this backdrop of chemical opportunity, cells equipped with internal compartments could take advantage of higher energy yields. Complexity did not emerge in isolation. It was tied to the very rhythms of tectonics and surface chemistry. The contrast between phenomena operating at vastly different scales, the atomic chain reactions at Oklo and the global rearrangements of Columbia, is striking. Both were governed by the unyielding rules of physics and geology, and both affected the planet's capacity to host life. One showed that natural nuclear balance could be achieved beneath the surface. The other demonstrated that slow but relentless tectonic cycles could rearrange the surface world. Together, they defined a period where environments enriched by geology gave biology a platform to experiment with new strategies and greater complexity. Columbia, like all supercontinents after it, was not permanent. Over hundreds of millions of years, cracks opened along its seams, fragments pulled apart, and new oceans widened between them. Later cycles would see new supercontinents emerge, only to break again. Each cycle changed circulation patterns of oceans, exposed new lands to weathering, and reshaped climates. For life, these transformations provided repeated pulses of novelty: new coastlines, new shallow seas, and new ways of distributing nutrients. Microbes adapted to these changing conditions across great spans of time. Some began experimenting with new ways of exchanging genetic material, a departure from the simple division that had defined reproduction before. Others shifted toward predatory and defensive strategies, no longer content to rely solely on chemical gradients or sunlight. These shifts marked a change in how evolution unfolded. No longer was it only geology, chemistry, or atmospheric gases that drove direction. Now, organisms themselves were beginning to pressure one another into new forms and strategies. By the close of this era, Earth remained a microbial planet, but its inhabitants had diversified in structure and behavior. Larger cells, compartmentalized internals, and early signs of genetic exchange hinted at future revolutions. The oceans were no longer home only to passive colonies and chemical scavengers. Some lineages were already testing innovations that would alter the evolutionary landscape irreversibly. Those changes set the stage for the next breakthrough, strategies that would rearrange reproduction, competition, and survival in ways no geological cycle ever had. Sex armor and the first predator wars. Billions of years before dinosaurs or mammals left their mark, microscopic organisms stumbled onto an innovation that completely reshaped evolutionary possibilities: sexual reproduction. Until then, nearly every lineage replicated through simple division. One cell became two, identical except for errors introduced by chance. That sort of copying was efficient but limited. Asexual populations changed only slowly, most mutations being detrimental. Then sex appeared and everything accelerated. Sexual reproduction allowed two individuals to combine genetic material, mixing traits with each pairing. Variation increased dramatically, and with it the opportunity for natural selection to work far more effectively. Fossils like Bangiomorpha**, dating to about 1.2 billion years ago, provide the earliest fossil evidence of this process. The preserved filaments of this early red alga show structures consistent with sexual reproduction, hinting that entire cellular lineages were already experimenting with ways to shuffle genes. Once this mechanism became established, evolution gained a new tempo. Recombinant populations could produce countless genetic combinations in every generation. Many were less successful, but some gave organisms a significant edge. Advantages spread rapidly. Populations recovering from environmental shifts could rebound with greater diversity, while pathogens or competitors faced a constantly shifting target. In effect, whole ecosystems began evolving faster. But sexual reproduction also carried another unintended consequence. It provided raw material for new forms of ecological interaction. Some microbes, enlarged by eukaryotic complexity, moved beyond scavenging and began targeting living cells directly. They engulfed, digested, and survived on the tissues of others. Life itself became a primary source of danger as the planet entered the first predator-prey arms races. Those races intensified across millions of years. Early predator cells developed appendages that allowed them to swim faster through microbial mats or extend pseudopodia to pull prey inside. In response, prey evolved countermeasures. Some grew tougher cell walls, others deposited minerals into their outer layers, turning themselves into armored spheres and ellipsoids that resisted digestion. Under a microscope today, those defenses appear as intricately sculpted shells, ridged, spiked, or layered, each designed to make a predator hesitate or fail. Even colonies organized themselves into filaments and clusters, their combined size offering protection against individual hunters. Evolution was becoming cyclical. One adaptation was answered by another, responses escalating in alternating turns. The fossil record preserves glimpses of these long battles. Microfossils from this interval sometimes show conspicuously thickened walls, evidence of lineages investing significant energy in self-defense. Stromatolitic layers reveal collective forms, microbial communities arranged in mats that may have resisted ravaging predators by sheer density. Later records, closer to the dawn of animals, preserve direct traces of predator pressure. Shell borings in organisms such as *Cloudna* show that drilling, puncturing, and consumption had become widespread strategies before and during the Cambrian Explosion. These early markers confirm that the interaction between predator and prey was already well established long before larger, visible organisms dominated the seas. Sex only deepened the escalation. Mixing genes meant both sides in this contest could innovate faster. A successful defensive mutation could combine across populations, rapidly stabilizing against attack. Meanwhile, predators benefited from new abilities to maneuver or secrete stronger enzymes. This exchange created an evolutionary cycle where biology itself, not just climate or geology, became the selective landscape. Sex multiplied genetic options while predation selected for armor, mobility, and new body plans, a double push toward complexity. The consequences rippled outward. Microscopic though the players were, these dynamics shaped ecosystems as fundamentally as later forests or coral reefs would. In nutrient-rich coastal waters, armored cells clustered in mats resistant to predation. Those groups altered sedimentation, leaving faint yet cumulative signs in layered rocks. Elsewhere, drifting plankton, targeted by motile predators, drove shifts in water chemistry and recycling of organic matter. Each interaction, predator consuming prey, prey resisting capture, echoed at planetary scales despite occurring unseen.